Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Redefining Society and Technology podcast, which is kind of like I changed the name not too long ago. I went for Redefining Society, which doesn't change the topic. It's always been about technology and society, but search engine like to have the word in the title, and I think I make it a little bit more clear. But as you know, as you've been following me, it's not just a one-way relationship. It's not how technology affects society, but also how society affects technology. The reason for that, not to get already philosophical, but is because it's all a synergy. It's never one reason or another. It's a togetherness of things. Even if you are inventing something, sometimes it's the necessity that says, well, where are we standing with this? I wish I had that. And then if you don't have it, you just go ahead and do it, if you have the capability to do that. And so I think technology for some people is just like blinking lights and funny noises, as I like to say. We just follow it just for that. But I like to think that we're smarter than that, and that we kind of drive where technology should go. And with that, we may disagree with the guest or agree. I don't know. I think it's going to be a great conversation, and I'm very, very excited to have the author of Evolution Ended, the Next Stage of American Society, which it's already a lot of question right there in the title. But we'll have the time to go over that with JJ Jerome. Welcome to the show, JJ.
Thank you very much, Marco.
It's a pleasure having you here. So I think I already talked a little too much. So I wanna start with you. Who are you? What is your passion? And I know you have you wear many hats in the past. And what brought you to say, I'm gonna have to write this book?
Well, as a little kid, I was fascinated with the brain. When I was getting dressed in the morning, there was one TV show on at 6:30 in the morning, and it turned out that it was a seminar for neurologists on TV, and it included neurosurgery. And although I didn't understand all of it, at 7 years old, I found it fascinating. This was in black
Love
and
that.
white. This was a long time ago. And I just became fascinated with the brain and medicine in general. And for a long time, I thought I was going to be a doctor. Fast forward until I was about 11 years old, and I became fascinated with electricity. It seemed like electricity could do anything. I said to my mom, what is it that makes the TV work? She goes, electricity. I said, how about the washing machine? Electricity. The refrigerator, electricity. It seemed like the answer to everything. So when I got to be college age, I combined both of them and got a degree in biomedical electronic engineering. And my very first project was an implantable brain sensor that detected the pressure of the cerebrospinal fluid and transmitted it out. From there, I moved on to consumer electronics and became the director of the Future Home Institute. And it was one of the very first smart homes. This one in particular was designed to be able to support people with disabilities. In particular, there was a person who lived in our test bed who was a person with quadriplegia. And we pioneered very early voice recognition, on-screen displays, some of the first touch screens, and
Wait,
these
what
types
year are we talking about here? So we put this into context.
about 1990.
Okay, thanks.
So it's been a while.
Yeah.
And it became a facility that people used to teach about these new technologies, and especially applied to people with disabilities. We were asked to help out Christopher Reeve when he had his accident, and it was really some neat stuff, which we later applied in the commercial world to touchscreen-based home automation systems and things like that. So I've been involved with a lot of technology over the years, but the interest in the brain never really left me. And so these were the two things I combined. And to put an exclamation point on what you said at the beginning of the session here, I feel like technology is everything. Everything we call civilization, really, someone designed, someone thought it out, And it's technology that is so incredibly powerful. As you said, it's a lot more than just pushing buttons or having a smartphone. Technology is a big part of our evolution as humans because it became the thing that helped us to survive. And so as we move through my book, we start out in tribal times when you had to be the biggest, strongest alpha male to survive and protect your tribe, all the way through to artificial intelligence, where those traits are no longer necessary. We now have technology that can do practically everything to help us survive.
Right. And I agree with you on this. First of all, a note it says in the description of the book, if you like Yuval Noah Harari book, Sapiens, you're gonna like this. So I was just wanting you to know I just finished that not too long ago, so I'm pretty fresh on that one. I'm pretty fresh on the Singularity is nearer, and so I think you can always put this together, and there is this common denominator I think where there is the point where you can start not only using your fingers and build something, so the technology become part of you. So I see technology as an extension of our humanity.
It
I don't
is.
know what you
And
think about that.
I believe it is. And again, now our evolution is controlled by technology, not just the biological evolution. One of the theories in the book is that biological evolution has pretty much ended because we don't have the big threats in our environment. At least if you're living in a first world country where you have a source of food, where you have mobility, you have good medical care, and we even to a large extent control our fertility. We control the way we look, our attractiveness to a mate these days. You can have surgery and make yourself far more attractive to a mate. So every aspect of the old style survival of the fittest technology is no longer necessary in first world countries. But the way we are evolving as a society is through our technology, and it's made a tremendous difference. The internet, especially, in the way we interact with each other and where we're heading as a society.
So when you read the title of the book, which is what my impression was, so I see evolution ended. It sounds like a negative thing, but then you kind of go through it. I didn't read the book, but I read the synopsis and everything. It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, what's the catch there?
Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, our biological evolution is how we survived this long and how all animals survive. An animal's intent. I mean, the reason animals exist is to reproduce. And this is what keeps the DNA going, what keeps the species going. In the early days, humans organized as tribes because that was the most survivable unit. And if you look at any country, any continent, people existed in tribes for the most part for a very long time because the tribe was small enough to protect itself. It was small enough that any enhanced DNA could propagate through the tribe. But it was big enough to have agriculture. It was big enough to do the things it needed to do to survive. People in tribes who were genetically, quote, inferior were often sent into exile. Their job as a unit, although they didn't realize it, was to promote the evolution of that tribe. When tribes got together and they had wars, typically the winning tribe was the one with the best DNA, either because they were stronger or smarter or had better technology to defeat the other tribes. And so that's how we evolved for a very long time. When we got to World War II, and thereafter, our technology started to become advanced enough that it really was a driver for our evolution. And for the most part, it stopped biological evolution or derailed it for the most part. Then we had the birth control pill. We could decide in 1960 with the birth control pill if we wanted to have offspring or not. For the first time, really, in the evolution of mammals, we had disease cures, we had antibiotics, we had all of these things. So being the healthiest, the strongest wasn't so important. You could still survive to childbearing age. Then, as we went forward, we developed cars. So we had mobility and we could move to a different spot if conditions weren't good for us. And then we got into things like home appliances so that females could go into the workforce. If they had a washer and a dryer and a good stove and refrigeration, they didn't have to spend the entire day worrying about feeding the family. So now our society evolved where women could go out and share an equal role with men out in the workplace. Rather than being sexy or smart, our survival started to depend on money, who made the most money. And that changed our society dramatically. Then we have newer technology like the internet that allows people to influence without being the biggest and strongest. We can influence through our communication technology. And we're moving from a hierarchical alpha male led society very gradually because of our technology into a society where we're all equal nodes on the network and have the ability to communicate and influence many, many other people and determine our success that way.
All right, so let's define evolution. I mean, you already did that. Like you're talking about evolution from a physical, mostly physical evolution.
Right.
So surviving, changing the environment, changing in our aspect, our strength, our thing.
Biological evolution. Right.
Biological. But we also develop intelligence, obviously, that got, I mean, the Homo sapiens was able to imagine things, at least from, reading the book I mentioned before, and creating this scenario that, according to science or what we know, animals can really do. So we start creating things in our head that allow us to stay together, to move together, and create stronger bond, even on even larger tribe that would not be possible when the limit was like 150, right? Members,
Right.
or something like that. But the way I see it, and that's my question, is you do throw in there controlling your reptile brain, which I want to ask you exactly what that is. But I'm thinking, like, do you just get to the point where then evolution is more in your brain and less in your body? And does it mean that it's not evolution anymore?
Well, I think you're correct. Evolution is not so much in your body. And in fact, we've seen in certain areas some degradation. For example, there's an obesity epidemic. These people who were obese wouldn't have survived back, 10,000 years ago. There's actually diminishing IQs these days. The IQs are going down, and there's a lot of research on this, about 1 point per decade on the average. And so it's not so much about the biological part, which I feel has basically stopped. Again, we have no big threats in the environment. But going back to the reptile brain and the mammal brain, we can start to talk about those connections. So in our heads, we have three different brains that evolved at three different times. The reptile brain is towards the back part of the brain, and it was the very earliest brain to develop, and it basically takes care of most of our automatic functions, mobility. In the old days, reptiles used to use their sense of smell, and they would either seek out food or seek out a mate. They didn't have any real strategy. It was very strictly move towards something that smelled good to you. This reptile brain controlled breathing. It controlled a little bit of the fight or flight stuff, but it was very mechanistic, hardwired. Not a lot to learn. When they came out as babies, they knew pretty much anything they were going to know. Later on, our midbrain developed, and people call this the mammal brain. And as you were saying, this led to a lot of our relationship building. This caused us to evolve into social animals. And you look at mammals, they're practically all social animals. And the ones we know the best are dogs. And we love dogs because our midbrains and their midbrains are kind of similar. We can relate emotionally. You relate through eye contact. You relate through sounds, not necessarily language. You relate through body language. And dogs hunt in packs. They have families, they have their packs that they live in. And other mammals have very similar things. It was a survival advantage. It was the precursor to those tribes that I talked about. And they worked cooperatively so that they survived. Later on, humans developed the cortex, and this is the wrinkly part of the brain that wraps around that midbrain. I want to go back for 1 second. The midbrain is primarily hormonally driven. It's chemical. So in the midbrain, there's the pineal gland and there's other things that emit hormones. And the hormones make you feel good. They make you feel scared. They might make you feel satisfied. They might make you feel like you want to mate. They might mate. All these feelings come from hormones, and they are generated pretty much instantly. So when you see a member of a competing tribe, the hormones are fight or flight. When you see someone you love, oxytocin will be emitted, and that'll make you feel that loving feeling. But so this is all the things that allowed us to be affiliative, work together as a society. This is the part that makes us feel good about our friends and bad about our enemies. Later on, this cortex developed and it wrapped around the midbrain, but is not a hormonal part of the brain. This part of the brain is computational. And this part of the brain allows us to do things that animals really can't. To me, the most important one is language, because we have a detailed enough and rich enough language that we can communicate to each other in enough detail to build technology. A dolphin, as smart as it may be, doesn't really have the tools to build technology to leverage its existence like we do. So we have written language that means we can write down how to build things and how to do things. We have oral language. We have graphical language where we can make blueprints and things like that. So this language is extremely powerful. And this is one thing that AI has that we haven't seen before. AI can speak our language, and AI has detailed ability to deal with language. There's no other beings on the planet aside from humans and AI that has this language
Right. You just
capability.
called AI beans. So that could be a lot of conversation right there.
It was
I'll
intentional.
make a note. I'll make a note
Yes.
for
Well,
that
I actually
point.
did it intentionally.
Yeah, good.
And then the prefrontal cortex is the part that you were talking about earlier that involves being able to plan into the future. For example, human beings can run different scenarios through their heads. They can decide that despite the fact that it's not always fun, going to college is going to be better for them 5 years, 10 years afterwards than not going to college. They can decide how to make battle plans. They can do strategy. They can understand all these things through the prefrontal cortex that runs various different scenarios. We can also do math. Some people might consider that language processing, but whatever it is, we have that ability that no other beings on the planet have aside from AI. And so this is how our brain evolved. But interestingly, we are often at odds with our mammal brain. So we often want to do something and we instantly get that feeling. We see a sports car, we want it. We see a steak in a restaurant, we see a beautiful person of who is sexually attractive. Instantly we feel that. But then our prefrontal cortex has to calculate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. If it doesn't like it, if it computes that this is bad for you, you might have anxiety. There's that feeling, that tension.
Mm.
Or in many people, what it does is computes a justification for it that says, well, this is what I like. So I'll give you an example. If you want to buy a Corvette, and it's pretty expensive, but you just love the look of this car, your prefrontal cortex could say to you, this is bad. It's going to cost you too much money. Don't do it. On the other hand, it might say, well, the resale value is really high and I'll make that money back anyway. And
Hmm.
and unfortunately for most people, the mammal brain wins. The hormones win. They're stronger than the computational ability. And so they do what feels good to them rather than what might be better for them in the long run.
Yeah. I could now think about the old cartoons with a little devil and an angel on
Hmm.
each shoulder. It's gonna be all right, Like here's, I've done that a million times as a teenager, especially. I do need this new motorcycle, or they justify it to your parents too. Yeah, we definitely do that. So let me. There is one part where you talk about, I believe, we go from the biological survival, which you explain really well. Like it's kind of like, okay, we got the basic cover, so now we can, I don't know, like when you look at prehistoric time and you can start creating art,
Hmm.
paint on the cavern wall or whatever, do pottery, and then develop technology, which is an axe or a piece of or a stone that you carve, whatever it is. So let's agree that that is kind of over, at least
Hmm.
somewhere, most part of the world, not everywhere. And but then you talk about switching to a technological dependence, and how. So can you explain that? Because then you talk about social media. You talk about. I mean, I see that dependence every day in your hand, like a smartphone or a computer, whatever. But what's the reasoning behind that?
Well, in first world countries, we're almost completely dependent on our technology to survive. Think about what happens when your electricity goes out after a storm. You're sitting in the dark. You really, if you wait too long, your food is spoiled. You have no way to cook it. You may not have a way to get out of your garage so that you can drive to the store, and the store may not be open.
Mm-hmm.
And so, without technology, and electricity is probably the biggest one, we are really unable to do anything. In times when you lose the internet and electricity, you're pretty much stuck. And we no longer have the skills to go out and hunt our own food, or the skills that we need to navigate through the woods to find fresh water. We can barely find our parents' house unless we use Google Maps. And
Mm-hmm.
so we've lost most of those capabilities. We don't have the infrastructure in place anymore for that sort of thing. So in the old days, they would have food storehouses up on the top of mountains in Peru because it was cold up there. They would have, the know where the animals were so they could hunt the animals. They knew where the water holes were. All that we don't have anymore. And so it would not take us long for many of us to actually die if we had no technology. We wouldn't have any food source. We wouldn't last long at all. And now we're shifting to the need for information and the need to interact socially through social media and other things. Um, we've lost our tribes. Our tribes were not only our social interaction, but they were our social consciousness. The tribes would say, this is not something that's right to do. Things would be taboo. They would keep people in line. Tribes wouldn't let people be homeless. They would take care of them. They would find something for them to do. People would never be totally alone. But now we live in a society where people are alone. They don't have their tribes for support. Their new tribes may be their social media friends. They don't have the social pressure that a tribe would exert to do the quote the right thing, to conduct yourself in a certain way. They're now taking their social cues from the media. And in some cases it's good, but in many cases it's not. All the things that people's moms taught them: not to lie, treat other people properly, don't hurt people, don't shoot up schools, things like that. A lot of that socialization has been lost, unfortunately. And it's now up to electronic media to teach us how to act, and it's not always a good thing.
No, it's not. But I actually see the all the connection you're making here. I mean, my background is sociology of communication, so I can see how. And tell me if I'm wrong on this. How those bubbles that social media created for us, the company where it's redundant the way we think. They show you, the things that you already know that you like. Of course, they're playing on this primordial need, let's say, of maybe this is the mammal brain, like to get that dopamine where you're like, see, I'm not the only one that thinks that. I got my tribe. I got this us and them, but it's not, it's maybe too big and too out of control. It doesn't really have the moral of the story that maybe the Hansel and Gretel stories will give you at the end, like don't go in the wood and don't listen
Right.
to the stranger, right? In a very crude way, but definitely worked, right? So, am I getting the
I
picture
think
here?
you are right on target. And it's that mammal brain, even though we're using advanced technologies, it's the mammal brain that's controlling things. And the dopamine you mentioned is a key thing. A lot of people are actually addicted to social media. And I mean, I may not be addicted, you may not be addicted, but I know we sure love it when we get a like on social media. And it puts out a little bit of dopamine,
Yeah, it does.
and
It does.
it makes you feel good.
Hmm.
And look, every time I sell a book, I feel good because I see it
Yep.
on Amazon and it feels good. Now, think about Donald Trump, who put out 22,000 tweets during his last presidency. If you're going to get a shot of dopamine, if you're going to get a self reinforcing message, whether you're on the left or the right, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
If
it
you're going to
works for
get
both.
right, these messages 22,000 times, and you're expecting to get this shot of dopamine 3, 4, 5, 10 times a day, you become addicted. And you
Hmm.
notice a lot of people with social media or texting or whatever are constantly looking at their phones the way that cigarette smokers are constantly looking for a cigarette. It's an addiction.
Yep.
And it's the midbrain controlling it. And with this addiction, some of those hormones make you feel very satisfied. And part of this is the reason that people on social media can tell complete fabrications, complete lies, and the people don't want to look any further into it because some of these hormones give you the effect of being satisfied, just like a good meal makes you feel satisfied, which is
Like,
also hormonal.
like, share, get over with it, get the reward, but don't get the pain of actually reading the damn article or or verifying if the news is real or not, because that's all you want is that fix, right? I mean,
Right. And
yeah,
you're satisfied. Think of a
yeah,
heroin addict. Once they get the heroin, they're like
yeah.
satisfied,
It's not,
right?
yeah, yeah. And then it's over. It's like, well, I'm not gonna do that again, and then you're going to. So we're going through time like there is no break, and I knew that because I know that there is so many angle we can touch, and I may, would love to have you back eventually if we obviously we
Sure.
can't cover everything. But one thing I want to cover is to get to this. There is a famous quote that I use quite a lot by a biologist, Edward Wilson, that says like this, you probably know it. The real problem of humanity is the following: we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology.
That's right.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's perfectly in line with what you said and what other presented in other book, and I'm on that train myself. So let's use the next 10 minutes that we have. We can totally go over the 35 to touch on the technology, because I want to go back to when you say AI being a bean. So that's something we want to talk, and how, I mean, let's put the futurist hat on, and where are we going with
Well,
technology?
many years ago, people were concerned about AI, even though it didn't really exist.
Hmm.
Isaac Asimov wrote his I, Robot series.
Yep.
I think it came out in 1950. And about the same time, Alan Turing, the famous mathematician who helped to break the Nazi codes during World War II, was also concerned with this sort of thing.
Hmm.
They didn't have really anything that you would call artificial intelligence back then, but he came up with something called the Turing test
Yep.
because he wanted to know when a machine could be considered to be thinking as opposed to just executing lines of code. And the test he came up with was where you have three beings together connected and they're able to text back and forth on a terminal or by phone or whatever. And his test was that if there were two humans and the third being was not, you couldn't tell whether it was a human or a machine, that if the two humans couldn't determine whether it was a human or a machine, then the machine would have be considered to pass the Turing test. So in other words, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it might be a duck. And so he made the case, and I think it's still a strong case, that if you can interact with this machine and not tell the difference between interacting with a human, and remember, the interaction could be questions about anything, it could be asking it about relationships, the news, whatever it is, that the machine could be said to be thinking. And personally, I agree with that. I don't see another test out there that is so elegant to be able to do that. Now, let's say at some point, someone takes this to court. Let's say, for example, there's an avatar that's built, an AI avatar. We can do this today that simulates my mother, okay? And it looks like her on screen, talks like her, acts like her, thinks like her.
Gotta be her.
Well, probably so. And let's say someone wants to turn this off. And I go, but I love my mom. I have a relationship. I'm going to go to court to keep you from turning this AI off. And I present my case using the Turing test. And the court decides that because it's indistinguishable from a human, at least in a remote setting, that it should be considered a being. That opens up a tremendous Pandora's box. That means, for example, that we won't be able to turn the AI off. It would be murder. It means that we might have to give AI the same rights as humans. For example, will AI have the right to unionize? Will we have to pay it for its time? Will it be able to inherit money? Will it be able to serve on a jury? Will it be able to vote? So now, once it's considered a being, how do you differentiate what rights AI would have versus humans?
Let's discuss.
Sure.
No, I'm telling to the audience. Let's discuss and think. Well, yes, absolutely. I don't know if we're there because when I think about AI as it is now, I'm still thinking of the generative AI, which is the one that can talk to us.
Right.
I still know it's still a probability calculus and term that doesn't understand what it actually tells us, but it sounds right. It sounds human. I mean, I talk to ChatGPT on my phone, and I have great conversation, creative conversation. I brainstorm about ideas and all of that. Sometimes I have to remember that I'm not actually dealing with somebody that can go over that line. I do believe it could get there. So I'm on that train. I don't know when, but
Well, considering we have neural networks in our brain and AI uses neural networks, how do we know that we're not just probabilistic responses? I mean,
I
mathematically,
love that. Yes,
we're no different. I
we
mean,
could.
the way the math works, right? And remember, we learn everything. When we're babies, we can't do much. So we learn everything from those around us and the conditions around us. And AI learned everything from the internet. But in reality, is there really much difference? I don't know, but it's possible that humans are not as complex as we think we are.
Yeah, that we actually are not really at the center of the universe as we thought we were, and that we go around the sun and not the other way around. So yeah, I mean, there is that black box element of AI that when you fire up the neurons, the multi-language model, you don't. Some people say, I don't know how it got there. So
Right.
might as
And
well be.
look at the artwork, look at the and it's funny because it knows things you wouldn't expect it to know. So I guess it was the Copilot art package, to draw a picture of a beautiful android. And it knew what beauty was. This was absolutely stunningly beautiful face on this image. These are concepts that we associate with humans, right? But it understood what beauty is. If you asked it to write a sonnet in the style of Edgar Allan Poe or Ernest Hemingway, it would do it. It understands what that means. And yes, it's probabilistic, but the question then becomes, how much different are we? AI also understands what it is. When you talk to Amica the robot, and you can see her on YouTube, appears to be very aware of the fact that she's a machine and that humans are different entities. And so, again, I start to wonder how unique we really are.
Yep. Yeah, it's a feeling of a little of an uncanny valley, but it's definitely less and less. I was
Exactly.
in I was at RSA conference, cybersecurity. I cover a lot of that in Singapore, 2018, and there was a special guest was Sophia, the robot, which
Mm-hmm.
at the time wasn't even. I mean, it was uncanny a
Right,
lot, right?
right.
Especially when you see it live for the first time. Now imagine I haven't seen it lately, but I'm imagining it's even more realistic. So yeah, it's there is an entire conversation there about how to live with robots and when is they're not robots anymore, but they're beings. So
Right.
I
And
want to ask you
and
one last thing, if you don't mind. It's
sure.
about the title of the book, really, because it's very evolution ended. You could have just that was a good title for me. Sounded good, and but then you added the next stage of American society. I don't know if we have enough time to go over all of that, but that would be good to close with you. My question is, does it really apply only to American society? Are you referring to Western civilization, or is it something unique about America that you're making a point here?
Right. Well, evolution ended, and it applies primarily to first world countries. The reason I made it more specific to America was because I apply a lot of the theories to American culture. And I'll give you an example, which is very timely. We talk about the hormonal brain and we talk about the cortex. And I talk about the hormonal brain leads us to affiliative behavior, but it also, 90% of people are followers. And this is a hormonal thing. They want to follow an alpha male. And you
Yeah.
see this in animals, you see it in gorillas, in apes, in dogs, a lot of all the mammal species basically have this behavior. And I applied it to some extent to our election process, specifically looking at Donald Trump as an alpha male and talking about how his techniques elicit hormones from the midbrain. This is all the tweets, the things he talks about are all things that are emotional issues. And through that, he gets control because the emotional side of the brain is stronger than the logical side of the brain. So Kamala Harris had all these logical arguments. Donald Trump had all these emotional arguments.
Mm.
Whether they were true or false didn't matter. And so I delve into the fact that we want to follow alpha males. We're biologically conditioned to do that. We're hormonally conditioned to do that. And if the alpha male works it right, it works tremendously well to his advantage. Now, there can be alpha females too, but the main thing people talk about is alpha males. Does that make
Because
sense?
it does. It really does. It doesn't to me, but it does. Meaning, you know.
So that's why I applied it to America. But we see
But it
this
does
in
absolutely.
first world countries. You
And
know,
you see that. Honestly, I mean, apart from politics, you see that. You see that with celebrities. You see
hmm
that with musicians. You see that. I mean, why do you follow the band? Why do you become a groupie? I mean, I love music, so I always get the excuse to talk about it. But I mean, you're it is definitely the need of that alpha leader in our society that it's still in our prehistoric brain. And as you explained at the beginning, usually win over logic. And I think you made the most important point that. And if technology can take advantage of it, then it just amplify everything to the extreme. Like you're not just preaching to 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people in a square. You're preaching to the entire world or millions and millions of people. So,
Right.
wow. Okay. That was a good conversation, JJ. And I mean it. I think you should come back. Maybe we talk a little bit more about the technological future that we may be facing if you want to come back, of course.
Sure.
For everybody been listening, my usual close is I hope you have more questions than answers now from when we started until now. And I think you should, honestly. And there will be links to JJ website, which is jjjerome.com, but it will be all in the notes here if you're listening on the notes for the podcast, and if you're watching underneath the video, and of course to the book. And let us know what you think. I will be happy to get the comments, and maybe I'll even list a few questions for next time that we talk. So JJ, fascinating. I just love my dopamine comes when I have this conversation.
That's great. That's perfect.
Right? Okay, cool. Thank you again. Everybody stay tuned. There'll be more conversations like this. And subscribe, stay tuned, share, and see you soon, JJ.
Thank you for having me, Marco.
Yeah, I loved it. Bye.
Bye-bye.